I was 28 the year I thought I had it all figured out. Fresh promotion, better pay, new title on the business card, junior sales manager. It sounded good when I said it out loud. My parents were proud. My friends cracked jokes about me finally joining the rat race, and my girlfriend tried to be supportive even though she hated how much I was gone. I told myself the travel was temporary, that once I proved myself on the road, I'd earn a permanent spot in the Denver office and settle down. That was the story I repeated to anyone who asked. The truth? I was bone tired. I'd been living out of a suitcase for 3 straight months, eating reheated leftovers in motel microwaves, and sleeping on beds that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes. My girlfriend's calls grew shorter. My family thought I was avoiding them, and every drive felt like one more mile further from the life I wanted. It was late October, a Thursday night, when I pulled into a place called the Red Pine Motel off Highway 64, just outside Flagstaff. I hadn't planned to stay there. It wasn't even close to the business park where my meetings were scheduled, but my booking app had pushed it to the top of the list. 10 minutes away, the app said. Turned out it was more like 35, down a road so empty I started wondering if I'd taken a wrong turn. By the time I arrived, my eyes were gritty from the drive. My back ached from sitting all day, and all I wanted was a quiet room and 6 hours of sleep. The Red Pine looked like every other roadside motel I'd ever seen. A tired neon sign flickering, a half-lit parking lot with a handful of cars, and an office with a yellow light buzzing behind the blinds. Inside, the man at the desk introduced himself as Jerry. Thin guy, maybe mid-40s, with a smile that looked painted on. He handed me the key to room 12 and asked a string of small-talk questions. Traveling alone? Big day tomorrow? The kind of questions that should have sounded harmless, except for the way his eyes lingered too long on me after I answered. I forced a polite laugh, took the brass key, and walked to my room. Room 12 smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet had stains no cleaner had bothered to scrub, and the furniture looked like it had been there since the 90s. Still, I'd stayed in worse. I set my suitcase down, tried the TV, static, tried the lamp, flickered once, then steadied, and told myself to stop being picky. I had a long day tomorrow. That night I lay awake listening to the creaks. At first I figured it was the wind or maybe pipes shifting, but this motel was single-story, flat as a pancake, no upstairs. So what the hell was moving above me? Around midnight I sat up, staring at the ceiling. The moment I moved, the creaking stopped. I didn't sleep much after that. The next day was a blur of handshakes, presentations, and forced enthusiasm. By the time I got back to the motel, I was half dead on my feet. All I wanted was to collapse, but when I slid my key into the lock, the door pushed open without resistance. My stomach dropped. I was sure, absolutely sure, I had locked it that morning. I'd even double-checked, the way I always did before heading out. Inside, nothing looked ransacked. My suitcase sat untouched in the corner, but the TV remote had been moved from the nightstand to the desk, and one of the drawers, empty yesterday, was cracked open an inch. I muttered to myself, service. Housekeeping, maybe. Though I knew damn well I hadn't asked for, I marched to the office. The light was on, but Jerry wasn't there. The chair sat empty, a half-empty cup of coffee on the desk. I tapped on the counter, called his name, but no one came out. Eventually I gave up, went back to my room, and wedged a chair under the doorknob like some kind of budget security system. That night, the noises came back. Not faint creaks this time, but deliberate sounds. Footsteps, cabinet doors shutting, a dragging sound that made my skin crawl. I grabbed the motel phone to call the front desk. Deadline, not even static. I sat there with the receiver in my hand, staring at the old couch that had been shoved tight against the wall since the first night. Something about it felt wrong. The wall behind it looked slightly off, like the paint had been patched. Against my better judgment, I shoved the couch aside. Dust puffed into the air, and there it was. A small wooden hatch door, painted the same pale green as the wall. My chest tightened. I crouched, tugged the handle. Locked. Okay, I whispered. Forget it. Just forget it. Then, creak. The lock shifted from the inside. I staggered back so fast I nearly tripped over the couch. The hatch creaked open an inch and cold air seeped out. Damp, earthy, metallic. I knew that smell. Like basements, like rust. I held my breath. Nothing moved. Then I heard it. Breathing. Slow, heavy, steady. Someone was down there. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stared at the black opening, half expecting a hand to reach out. Seconds dragged into what felt like hours. Then the breathing shifted. Closer, like whoever it was had stepped up one stair. That broke me. I bolted, snatched my keys off the dresser, yanked the door open, and sprinted across the lot. My car door slammed, engine roared, gravel kicked behind me as I tore out of there. I didn't stop until 20 miles later, parked under the buzzing lights of a 24-hour diner. I sat there shaking, hands gripping the steering wheel, telling myself over and over, nothing, just tired, just paranoid. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard. It was the next morning. I called the motel to cancel the rest of my stay. No answer. I checked the booking site. The listing was gone, like it had never existed. But I'll never forget the sound of that lock sliding open on its own, or the breathing that followed me out of that room. I thought leaving the Red Pine Motel in the middle of the night would be enough. That once I made it to the diner, had a cup of bad coffee, and saw people around me, the fear would fade. But it didn't. I sat there for an hour, maybe longer, my reflection staring back from the diner's plate glass window, pale and wide-eyed. The breathing in that hatch replayed in my head like a loop I couldn't shut off. When the sun came up, I tried calling the motel to cancel the rest of my stay. The line rang and rang, then clicked into static. By the time I checked the booking app, the Red Pine Motel had already disappeared from my reservations. No record of my booking, no listing on the site at all. I told myself that was fine. Maybe the place shut down. Maybe it was some glitch. But the unease gnawed at me. Part of me needed to know if I was losing my mind. I drove by later that week, just before heading back to Denver. The sign was still there, buzzing faintly. The parking lot had a few cars scattered across it. The office light glowed yellow. Everything looked normal, except for the fact that when I parked across the street and watched for 10 minutes, not a single person went in or out. Jerry wasn't behind the counter when I finally walked in. The chair sat empty again. On the desk was the same coffee cup like it hadn't been touched in days. "Hello?" I called. Nothing. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something to move, for a sound, for proof I wasn't imagining all of it. But the only sound was the faint hum of the lights. I turned and left, heart hammering. I didn't even look back. On the drive home, I tried convincing myself to let it go. But some things, once you've seen or heard, you can't unsee. Years later, I still think about the Red Pine Motel. Not every day, but often enough. Sometimes I'll be driving past another rundown place off a highway, and my chest will tighten, like I'm about to see that same hatch door if I step inside. I never did tell anyone the full story. My girlfriend at the time thought I'd had too much caffeine and not enough sleep. My co-workers laughed when I mentioned weird noises in a motel, and honestly, I didn't blame them. If someone told me they ran out of a room because they heard breathing coming from a hidden basement, I'd probably smirk too. But the memory never left me. The sound of that lock sliding back from the inside. The way the air smelled when it opened. The fact that the listing vanished overnight as if the place had swallowed itself whole. Once, about 3 years later, I got curious enough to search the Red Pine Motel again. Not on booking apps, those turned up nothing, but on old property records. What I found made my skin crawl. The building had changed hands multiple times over the decades. The earliest record showed a basement addition never listed in later permits. That line stuck with me. Basement addition. It was the last time the basement was mentioned in any legal record. I closed my laptop and swore I wouldn't dig deeper. What I do know is this. I trusted my instincts that night. I ran. And maybe that's the only reason I'm here to tell the story. Sometimes when I'm on the road staring at another cheap motel in the distance, I think about room 12, about the hatch, about the slow, steady breathing of someone waiting just out of sight. And I wonder if Daniel Harris was just one name in a long list of guests who got too close to finding out what waited in the dark. Trust your instincts. In life, you'll find yourself in places, whether literal rooms or situations, that don't feel right. People might laugh if you act on a gut feeling, but fear is a signal, not a weakness. Listening to that instinct can mean the difference between walking away and getting trapped in something you'll never escape. Not every danger announces itself in daylight. Some hide in silence, in shadows, in the places we convince ourselves are safe. And when you feel that quiet alarm in your chest, you owe it to yourself to run. I still remember that summer in Barstow like it was yesterday, even though I was just 15. Back then, everything felt like a mix of boredom and possibility. My cousins and I thought we were grown up, even though we weren't, and a cheap motel felt like the edge of freedom. We could laugh too loud, stay up too late, and nobody could tell us to quiet down. Our family reunion was always noisy, always crowded with uncles arguing about football and aunts fussing over potato salad. But that year, July of 2010, my uncle decided to book rooms at a roadside motel to make things easier on the out-of-town cousins. He ended up putting the four of us girls together in a room. Belinda was 16, Kayla was my age, and Rachel was just a year younger. We looked like sisters more than cousins with the same blonde hair and blue eyes. People even joked that our family reunion could have doubled as a look-alike contest. The Willow Creek Motel sat right off I-15, the kind of place that always had a few flickering neon letters, a drained swimming pool, and a front desk clerk who barely looked up when you walked in. None of us cared. We were too busy feeling like this was our chance to play grown-ups. We dragged our bags upstairs to room 22, then immediately hit the pool. The water was warm and smelled faintly of chlorine, but we didn't care. We splashed around, shouted, and even made up a game of pretending we were on some MTV summer show. Later that evening, my uncle bought us greasy pizza from a takeout place. We ate it cross-legged on the motel carpet, giggling as the cheese slid off the crust. I don't know what it was about being together in that room, but the laughter came easy. That kind of laughter doesn't come back the same way when you're older. By 9:30, our restlessness kicked in. We decided to wander down to the lobby just to check it out. The place smelled of coffee that had been sitting for hours and had a vending machine humming in the corner. That's when we saw them, two men sitting with paper cups in their hands. They looked rough, like they'd been working construction or driving all day. Boots caked with dust, jackets stained, hair slick with sweat. One of them leaned over and said, "You girls here alone?" His grin made my stomach twist, but Belinda just flipped her hair like she was 20 instead of 16. "Maybe," she teased, and the rest of us giggled nervously. I didn't laugh. I noticed how heavy their stares felt. Then the front door swung open, and my uncle walked in. He barely noticed the men, but they sure noticed him. Their grins faded. We scrambled out of there, whispering and laughing upstairs, but something had shifted. I couldn't shake the way those men had been looking at us. By the time we piled back into our room, we'd convinced ourselves it had been harmless. Belinda even joked, "We could have gotten free sodas if you hadn't chickened out, Chloe." Rachel rolled her eyes and Kayla laughed so hard she nearly spit her drink. But when the lights went out and the TV flickered quietly in the corner, my mind kept replaying those stares. I kept wondering why men that old cared to talk to girls like us. It wasn't funny anymore. At 11:30, we were still awake, whispering across the beds, telling inside jokes and stories about school. The desert night pressed against the windows, quiet and still. That's when I heard it. The doorknob rattled. At first, I thought it was one of the cousins playing a prank, but all four of us froze. The knob rattled again, harder this time, like someone was testing the lock. Kayla whispered, "Uncle?" But no answer came. Then we heard it, a man's voice, low and impatient. "Come on, just open up. My skin crawled. Belinda stood, bold as always, whispering. She slipped the chain off and cracked the door. It's probably just the wrong room. That's when it happened. A gloved hand shot through the gap, grabbing her wrist. Belinda screamed, and the three of us lunged, pulling at her arms, trying to yank her back. The man's other hand was pushing at the door, trying to force his way in. For a moment, it was chaos. Screams, the sound of the door straining, Belinda's wrist twisting in his grip. I thought we were going to lose her. Then my uncle's voice roared across the hallway. "Hey, let her go!" The door flew open as he barreled into the man. There was a sick thud, a grunt, and then the figure stumbled backward before bolting down the hallway. His footsteps pounded down the stairwell until silence swallowed them. Belinda collapsed against us, her wrist covered in bruises shaped like fingers. My uncle slammed the door shut, locked it, and picked up the phone with shaking hands. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. We sat in a huddle, clutching each other as my uncle barked into the phone with 911. His face was pale, his voice sharp with anger and fear. The police finally arrived, their red and blue lights splashing across the motel walls. They searched the stairwells, the parking lot, every shadow they could find, but the man was gone. Vanished into the desert night like he'd never been there. We told them about the men in the lobby. The cops checked their room, but it was empty. Beds made, trash cans clean, not even a stray receipt left behind. It looked like no one had ever stayed there at all. The officer kept asking if we were sure. Yes, we were sure. We remembered their faces, their boots, their grins. I remembered the way my stomach twisted when they looked at us. That night, we left every light in the room on. None of us slept. Belinda sat with her wrist cradled in her lap, purple marks spreading where the hand had gripped her. Kayla cried quietly. Rachel held onto me like if she let go, something would snatch her next. I sat awake, listening to every sound, the hum of the vending machine, the buzz of the neon outside, every creak of the hallway. It felt like the walls were paper thin, like evil could reach us at any moment. Years later, whenever I think back on that reunion, I don't remember the swimming pool or the pizza or even the laughter. I remember that doorknob rattling. I remember the voice in the dark saying, "Come on, just open up." Morning didn't feel like morning. It felt like we'd survived something, but none of us knew what to do with it. My uncle had bags under his eyes, his voice hoarse when he told us, "Pack up, we're leaving." The motel looked different in daylight. The cracked pool glistened in the sun. The faded sign buzzed weakly and strangers milled about like nothing had happened. I stared at the hallway where the man had vanished, half expecting him to reappear in broad daylight. He didn't, of course. He was just gone. As we carried our bags down, Belinda kept rubbing her wrist, wincing when the bruises shifted under her skin. Rachel stayed glued to her side, not saying a word. Kayla tried to joke, tried to act normal, but her voice cracked every time. My uncle marched us to the lobby to check out. The clerk looked bored, chewing on a pen cap. When my uncle asked about the men who'd been in the lobby the night before, the clerk just shrugged. "Didn't see anyone like that," he muttered. "Rooms are empty now." His indifference made my stomach twist. We weren't crazy. We'd all seen them. But the motel acted like it never happened. We loaded into my uncle's car. As the desert highway stretched in front of us, none of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Belinda whispered, "If you guys hadn't pulled me back." She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have to. We all knew what she meant. The reunion carried on at my grandparents' house that weekend, but it wasn't the same. We were jumpy, watching shadows too closely, flinching whenever someone knocked at the door. Our parents noticed, but we said nothing. How could we explain? They'd either brush it off or panic, and neither option made sense. So we kept it between us, the four cousins and my uncle. That night in the motel became our secret, though it never really stayed locked away. Secrets like that don't. Time has a strange way of dulling the edges of fear, but never erasing it. I grew up, went to college, moved states, lived my own life. But every July when the heat set in, I thought about that night at Willow Creek. The cousins and I rarely talked about it directly, but it hovered between us whenever we reunited. Rachel would mention how she still couldn't sleep in ground-floor motel rooms. Kayla admitted once that she still checked locks 3 times before bed. Belinda carried the worst of it. The faint scar on her wrist, where the bruise had cut deep, remained a reminder she couldn't hide. For me, the hardest part was knowing how close we had come. A thin motel door, a faulty chain, a few seconds slower. Everything could have been different. That thought followed me through my teenage years and into adulthood. Sometimes I drive past motels just like that one, sun-faded, neon buzzing, paint peeling under the sun, and I feel the same cold knot in my stomach. It's not the buildings themselves, it's what they represent, how vulnerable we can be when we think we're safe. Looking back, I realize what scared me most wasn't just the men or the gloved hand yanking at my cousin. It was how fast normal could shatter. One moment, we were just kids laughing over greasy pizza. The next, we were fighting to keep one of us from being pulled into the night. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits in the room next door. What happened at Willow Creek Motel stayed with me because it forced me to understand something I hadn't known at 15. That danger doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, disguised as a smile in a lobby or a voice pretending it belongs at your door. But I also learned something else that night. Courage isn't always loud. It isn't about being fearless. It's about pulling together when fear tries to tear you apart. My cousins and I weren't strong alone, but together, we saved Belinda. My uncle's presence gave us just enough time. Never dismiss your instincts, no matter how small they seem. If something feels wrong, it usually is. And when fear comes, hold on to the people beside you. Sometimes the difference between tragedy and survival is just one locked door, one firm grip, or one person refusing to let go. My name is Mark Reynolds, and in November of 2018, I was 32 years old, sitting in a life that felt like it had collapsed without warning. A year earlier, my marriage had ended in a mess of arguments and court papers. My ex-wife had moved to Seattle, taking our daughter with her, and though I tried to be there for visitation, the 4-hour drive always felt like a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. Work was unfulfilling. Just spreadsheets and endless conference calls, and nights were worse. Quiet motel rooms, the glow of a TV, and a silence that pressed in too tight. That November, my cousins invited me to Salem for an early holiday gathering. I wanted to go, partly to feel normal again, partly to remind myself I still had family that cared. Dinner stretched long into the night, full of laughter I hadn't heard in too long. But when the question came, "You staying over?" I shook my head. I didn't want to crowd their house, didn't want to intrude. Truthfully, I also didn't want to lie awake on their couch, listening to my cousin and his wife whisper after the kids went to bed. So I found the cheapest place nearby, a rundown little spot called the Driftwood Motel. It was the kind of place you see from the highway, half-lit neon buzzing in the dark, promising vacancy like it was a gift. The online listing had only one blurry photo, but the price was low, and I told myself, "One night, Mark. You can survive one night." When I checked in, it was late, close to 11. The clerk, a man in his late 40s with thinning hair and a cheerful tone that felt just a little forced, greeted me like I was the first guest of the year. "Evening, you're our last guest tonight. Room 6, quiet corner." His eyes lingered too long, though, the kind of stare that makes you aware of your own posture. I smiled politely, took the key, and went on my way. The room smelled stale, cigarettes buried under something damp I couldn't quite name. The carpet was thin enough to see patches of floor beneath, and the lamp flickered before settling on a weak glow. I muttered, "Just one night. Get through one night." I lay on the bed, scrolling my phone until my eyes blurred, but just as I started drifting off, a sound jolted me awake. A sharp creak from the far wall, then a dull thump like a cabinet door closing. "Hello?" I whispered into the dark, immediately embarrassed. Silence answered back. I told myself it was plumbing, maybe the wind, but something didn't add up. The clerk had said I was the last guest that night, so who was in the room next door? The following evening, after another long dinner with family, I pulled back into the motel lot around 7:30. The front office was dark, though the neon open sign buzzed faintly. Nobody at the desk. I shrugged it off, figured maybe the guy had gone home early, and walked back to room 6. The moment I slid my key in, I noticed the door wasn't latched. It gave way too easily. Inside, my bag sat on the chair where I'd left it, but the zipper was half open. The TV remote was on the bed. I never put it there. My stomach sank. No, I whispered. No. It was subtle, but someone had been inside. I dialed the office number on the plastic card by the phone. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I told myself housekeeping had slipped in, but there'd been no knock, no sign, and what kind of motel cleaned at night? My chest tightened with unease. That night I lay awake, phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. Around midnight the noises started again. First footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing above or maybe below. Then a dragging sound, something heavy sliding across a surface. Finally, a sound that made my blood run cold. Breathing. Not the pipes, not the wind. Breathing. Human. Steady. Just beyond the wall. I sat up, scanning the room. My eyes landed on the old couch pressed awkwardly against the far wall. Something about it felt off. It was angled just enough to hide the seam of the wall behind it. Against every instinct, I got up and shoved it aside. There, almost flush with the wall, was a small wooden hatch. Its edges had been painted the same dull beige as the rest of the room, like someone had tried to hide it. My pulse thundered as I knelt in front of the hatch. There was a handle, small and scratched from use. I tugged at it. Locked. Relief washed over me for half a second, until I realized the lock wasn't a padlock or latch. It was a simple bolt, on the inside. I froze. Oh God, I muttered. Whoever had locked it was on the other side. Then came the sound, a slow metallic scrape as the bolt shifted. My knees went weak. The hatch creaked open an inch, then 2, revealing a staircase descending into pitch darkness. A cold draft rose from below, carrying the smell of damp concrete, rust, and something sour, almost metallic. I stumbled back, whispering, "Not real. This isn't real." Then it came. Breathing, louder now, echoing up the staircase. Heavy, deliberate, waiting. Every instinct screamed to run. I slammed the hatch shut, shoving the couch back in place with every ounce of strength I had. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped my car keys as I snatched them off the dresser. I didn't even grab my bag. Bursting out into the night, I sprinted across the gravel lot. My breath clouded in the cold air, heart hammering so hard it hurt. I dove into my car, jammed the key into the ignition, and tore out of the lot. In my rearview mirror, just before the motel disappeared behind me, I saw him. The clerk, standing outside room 6, watching me go. A faint smile stretched across his face like he'd been waiting for me to run. I didn't stop until I hit a 24-hour gas station nearly 30 miles away. I parked under the harsh fluorescent lights, locked the doors twice, and sat shaking in the driver's seat. My cousin picked up on the second ring. "Mark, everything okay?" I can't stay there. I'm coming over." "Where are you?" "On my way," I said. I didn't explain. How could I? I wasn't sure I understood myself. When I finally pulled into their driveway, my cousin opened the door in his pajamas. He took one look at me and frowned. "You look like hell." I wanted to tell him about the hatch, the breathing, the smile on the clerk's face, but the words lodged in my throat. Saying it out loud made it sound impossible. Instead, I muttered, "That motel's not right." He didn't press. He just nodded, made up the couch for me, and left me with a blanket. The next morning, with a clearer head, I tried to look it up. Driftwood Motel, Salem. Nothing. Not a listing, not a photo, not even an old review. It was like it had been erased overnight. For weeks after, I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, the holiday nerves. But deep down, I knew better. I hadn't imagined the sound of the bolt sliding open. I hadn't imagined the cold air, the smell of rust and damp. I hadn't imagined the clerk standing outside with that faint, knowing smile. Sometimes I dream of the hatch. I dream it opens fully, and something climbs the steps toward me, something that was waiting all along. I always wake up before it reaches me. I never went back to Driftwood. I don't know if it still stands, if it ever truly did. But I know what I felt in that room, and it wasn't a dream. Someone was down there, watching, waiting. That night taught me something I'll never forget. Trust your instincts. When a place feels wrong, when every part of you screams to get out, listen. Logic will tell you to ignore it, to rationalize. But instincts exist for a reason. They've been honed over centuries to keep us alive. I also learned that not every door is meant to be opened. Some darkness isn't curiosity, some silence isn't peace, and sometimes survival means walking away even if you never get answers. Because some answers you don't want. My name is Lauren Hayes, and in the autumn of 1994 I was 25 years old, broke, and trying to pretend my life wasn't falling apart. I had just left behind a man I thought I was going to marry, someone I had wasted nearly 3 years on, only to find out he had someone else the whole time. After the breakup, I tried to throw myself into work at the diner, but the same faces came through every day, and each night I went home to the same small apartment that smelled faintly of my upstairs neighbor's cigarettes. I felt stuck, restless, like I couldn't breathe. When my cousin Megan suggested a road trip, I jumped at it. She was 5 years younger, studying photography at community college, and she had this hunger for chasing the forgotten parts of America, abandoned gas stations, faded billboards, towns bypassed by the interstate. She wanted pictures for her portfolio. I wanted to feel like I was going somewhere again. We set off in my old Ford Taurus, the AC barely working, and drove through Arizona's endless desert. The land stretched so flat and wide it felt like the sky was swallowing us. We listened to tapes, Tom Petty, Alanis Morissette, whatever I had left in the glove box, and stopped at greasy diners along the way. Megan leaned out the window with her camera every chance she got, snapping photos of empty motels and broken signs. By the time we reached Winslow, the sun was gone, the air thick with dry heat and my eyelids heavy. We had been driving for 12 hours, and all I wanted was a cheap bed and 4 walls. That's when we saw the flickering neon. Sunset Vista Motel. Vacancies available. Looks cheap, Megan muttered as I pulled in. That's the point, I said, even though the place gave me a knot in my stomach. The lot was half lit, weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt, and a black pickup sat idle under a busted street lamp. The lobby was worse. A scratched plexiglass shield separated us from the clerk, a bald man with wet-looking eyes. The walls were yellowed from smoke, and a dusty cuckoo clock ticked too loudly above his head. "Cash only," he said before I could ask. "Don't you take cards?" "Machine's broken. Cash or no room." Every instinct told me to walk away, but exhaustion made me weak. I pulled out 2 20s, and he slid the key for room 14 through the gap in the glass. His eyes never left mine until I turned away. The room smelled of mildew. The carpet was burned through in spots, the curtains dotted with cigarette holes, and the bathroom sink leaked onto the cracked tile. A crooked painting of a desert sunset hung above the bed. I checked the locks out of habit. The chain was broken. "Perfect," I muttered. Megan laughed, snapping a photo of it. "At least it's authentic." But I didn't feel like laughing. Something about that place felt off, like it was watching us the way the clerk had, and I told myself it was just one night. Just one night. The thin walls made it impossible to sleep. I lay awake listening to every sound, the squeak of footsteps pacing above us, the faint cry of a baby down the hall, a thud that rattled the headboard as if furniture had been dragged. Megan had fallen asleep with her headphones on, the light from her Discman flickering blue across the sheets. I envied her calm. At 11:30, the doorknob jiggled, a metallic rattle, quick, deliberate. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Megan's eyes flew open. "Did you hear?" "Don't move," I whispered. The knob rattled again, then went still. We held our breaths, listening. After a minute, the silence returned, but it was the heavy kind that makes your ears ring. "Probably just someone drunk looking for the wrong room," Megan whispered. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been a mistake. Around midnight, Megan got restless. "I'm starving. I saw a vending machine in the lobby." "Are you serious?" I hissed. "After what just happened?" She grinned in the dark, always braver than me. "I'll be 2 minutes." I stood by the window while she left, chewing my thumbnail raw. That's when I noticed the black pickup truck. It circled the lot twice before stopping under the same broken lamp. 2 men sat inside, their faces shadowed, their eyes turned toward the second-floor rooms. When Megan returned, she was pale. The clerk was on the phone. He stopped when I walked in. He just looked at me, like he knew something. My stomach twisted. At 1:15, the knocking started. Soft at first, then a voice. "Room service. Complimentary drinks." We hadn't ordered anything. We both knew it. I shook my head at Megan. "Don't answer." The knocking grew louder, sharper, until the door shook in its frame. Then suddenly, silence. The payphone outside our door rang. The sound cut through the corridor like a scream. I felt sweat break across my forehead. Megan's hands trembled around her camera as if it could protect us. "We have to do something," she whispered. "What? Open the door?" Her lips pressed tight. I dragged the dresser across the carpet, shoving it against the door. My arms ached, but adrenaline made me stronger than I thought I was. We sat on the bed, backs pressed to the headboard, whispering what we'd do if someone forced their way in. "Throw the lamp at them," Megan said. "I'll grab the chair," I answered. We laughed, but it was hollow, desperate. The kind of laugh you give when you know you're in real danger. We stayed that way until dawn, the hours dragging like years. At 6 in the morning, the wail of sirens jolted us upright. I rushed to the window and saw police cruisers flooding the lot, red and blue lights bouncing off the cracked asphalt. Officers poured out, guns drawn, swarming the black pickup. 2 men were yanked from the cab, shoved face first against the hood, handcuffed. My chest heaved, but relief was fleeting. Moments later, the clerk was led out of the lobby, his hands bound behind his back. His wet eyes darted up at our room as if he knew exactly where we were watching. "Jesus Christ," Megan whispered. We packed in silence. I didn't even care about the leaky faucet or the crooked painting anymore. I just wanted out. We checked out with a young officer at the desk who told us everything. The motel had been under surveillance for months. The clerk had been working with traffickers, luring in travelers, stalling them until the pickup arrived. "You were lucky," the officer said, handing back my ID. "Might have gone differently. If you'd opened that door, things..." My hands shook as I tucked it into my wallet. Megan stared at the floor, her camera strap wrapped tight around her wrist. Back in the car, we sat for a long time before I finally turned the key. The Taurus rattled to life, and we rolled out of the lot without a word. Megan raised her camera, looked at the photos of the motel on her film, and quietly pressed the delete button on her memory. "Some places aren't meant to be remembered," she said. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We drove east into the rising sun, the desert stretching endless ahead of us, and I swore to myself I'd never stay in a roadside motel again. That night taught me that danger often wears an ordinary face. A neon sign, a cheap room, a clerk with a flat voice. All of it seemed so normal until it wasn't. My mistake was ignoring the knot in my gut, dismissing it as paranoia. What saved us wasn't bravery, but hesitation. The choice not to open a door when every instinct screamed something was wrong. Trust your instincts even when logic tells you you're being silly. Fear exists for a reason. It doesn't always mean run, but it does mean pay attention. That night in Winslow proved that a locked door, a moment's caution, can be the difference between surviving to tell the story or becoming one more name lost in the dark. My name is Michael Lawson, and by the spring of 2003 I was 62 years old. A retired detective who had seen just about every kind of cruelty a man could see in New Orleans. I'd carried a badge for 35 years, and when I finally turned in my gun, it was because my body had given out before my mind. The doctors told me my knees looked like old gravel roads after decades of climbing stairs, chasing suspects and hauling myself in and out of crime scenes. The left knee finally gave out during a hurricane evacuation drill in '02, and by January of the next year, I was in a hospital bed with a titanium joint hammered in place. Retirement wasn't something I looked forward to. My wife, Nancy, had passed away 3 years earlier after a long fight with ovarian cancer. She'd been my anchor, and when she was gone, I found myself drifting in a city that felt emptier without her laughter echoing off our kitchen walls. Our daughter, Caroline, lived in Lufkin, Texas with her husband and 2 little boys. She begged me to move closer after the surgery, at least for a while. "Dad, it'll be easier for me to check in on you," she said. I didn't want to be a burden, so I agreed to stay in a cheap extended stay motel while I did my therapy sessions. That's how I ended up at the Desert Rose Motor Lodge off Highway 59. The place had once been painted pink, but now the stucco had faded to a shade closer to dried salmon. The pool was drained and filled with weeds. The vending machines swallowed quarters without so much as a buzz, and the neon sign out front sputtered like it was dying every night. Still, it was only $30 a night with a weekly rate, and the room came with a bed, a table, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach. That was all I needed. My days were a pattern. Morning exercises with a rubber band and small weights. A drive to the physical therapy center where some kid barely out of college stretched and bent my leg until I wanted to curse, then back to my room to ice the knee. In the evenings, I read old crime novels or wrote long notes in a leather journal, trying to keep my mind sharp. But at night, when the quiet settled in and I couldn't hear anything but the buzz of the motel light outside, the loneliness sank heavy. The manager was a man named Pete. He had a long, pale face and always greeted me with the same toothy grin that felt rehearsed. "How's that knee, Mr. Lawson? Need extra towels?" He was friendly enough, but something about the way his eyes darted when he asked questions didn't sit right with me. Old habits die hard, and I'd spent too long reading faces to ignore my instincts. By the 3rd night, I started hearing noises through the thin wall between my room and 237. At first it was just muffled conversations in Spanish, nothing out of the ordinary. But then came the crying. A woman's soft sobs, followed by a man's harsh whisper, commanding her to be quiet. Once, around 1 in the morning, I heard the door slam and heavy footsteps running down the exterior hallway. My detective instincts stirred awake, and I knew this wasn't just thin walls and restless guests. Something was off. I tried to ignore it at first. After all, it wasn't my job anymore. I told myself I was a patient in recovery, a retired man with no badge, no gun, and no business snooping around. But that part of me, the part that had followed hunches into dark alleys and staked out crumbling houses for days at a time, didn't just shut off. The next morning I saw Rosa, the housekeeper, pushing her cart along the walkway. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, with tired eyes and a smile that looked forced. I nodded to her and asked casually, "Busy week for you?" She gave a polite laugh, but when I asked about the folks in 237, her shoulders stiffened. "They pay cash," she said quickly, looking down at her mop bucket. Moved along before I could ask anything else. "Always cash. Later that day, I noticed a different car parked outside 237, an old white van with tinted windows, the kind I'd seen 1,000 times in narcotic stings. 2 men unloaded boxes, keeping their heads low. That evening, I went out pretending to smoke, though I hadn't touched a cigarette since the mid-'80s. That's when I saw her, a teenage girl, maybe 15, stepping out of the room to get ice. She looked terrified. Before I could say a word, a man yanked her back inside by the arm. That night, I sat at the small table in my room and thought about Nancy. She had always been the one to remind me that justice wasn't just a job, it was a duty. She used to say, "Mike, some people were made to look away, but you weren't built that way." I took out my old camcorder, a relic from the 90s, and started recording from the window. Grainy footage, but it caught what I needed. Different cars arriving, men coming and going. Rosa delivering towels to a room that never asked for them. One evening near the laundry room, I overheard Rosa pleading with Pete. "This," she said, her voice breaking. "They scare me." Pete's voice dropped low, sharp. "I can't keep your mouth shut if you want your paycheck." I felt the knot in my gut tighten. This wasn't just a bad tenant situation. This was organized. My knee ached every time I limped across the lot, but I pushed myself to jot down license plates, times, and faces. I was too old to play hero, but I couldn't turn a blind eye. The warning came on a Thursday night. I was writing in my journal when I heard the knock. It was soft, almost polite. When I opened the door, no one was there, but under the mat was a folded piece of paper. 3 words, "Stay out of it." My heart thudded in my chest. Someone had spotted me. I closed the door, locked it, and sat with my back against the bed. I hadn't felt that old edge of fear in years, the kind that comes when you know you're not just a witness, you're a target. I thought about calling Caroline, but what would I tell her? That her old man was sticking his nose into trouble he had no business in? Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed an old colleague in Houston PD. His name was Frank, and we'd shared more stakeouts than I could count. When he answered, I whispered like the walls could hear me. "Frank, I think I've stumbled into something at this motel." "You sure you're not just restless after surgery?" he asked. I told him what I'd seen, the van, the girl, the cash, the crying. Then I sent him some of the photos I'd snapped. The line went quiet for a moment. "Mike," he said finally, "stay put, don't push it. You don't have a badge anymore." "I know," I said, "but somebody needs to pay attention." That night, I slept with my old pocket knife under the pillow just in case. 2 nights later, everything came to a head. Around midnight, I woke to shouting. At first it was muffled, then louder. Angry male voices, a crash, and a girl's scream. My instincts fired up like a siren. I grabbed the phone and called Frank again. "It's happening now," I hissed. Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across the cracked blinds of my room. Tactical officers in black gear swarmed the property, shouting commands, boots thundering against the walkways. I sat frozen by the window, heart pounding as they kicked in the door to 237. One by one, men were dragged out in cuffs. I saw 2 teenage girls wrapped in blankets, crying as officers led them to safety. Rosa stood near the laundry room, shaking and sobbing as a female officer tried to calm her down. And then Pete, smug, grinning Pete, was shoved into the back of a squad car, his fake friendliness gone. I watched it unfold like a scene from my old life, except this time I wasn't the one barking orders. I was just an old man in a motel room with a bad knee, bearing witness. The next morning, Caroline showed up in tears. She begged me to come stay with her family. "Dad, you can't keep doing this to yourself," she said, hugging me tight. I promised her I'd think about it, but inside I knew the truth. Even in retirement, even broken down, the job had found me. I couldn't ignore it any more than I could ignore my own heartbeat. Later, when the lot had emptied and the flashing lights were gone, I sat at the small table and opened my journal. On the last page, with shaky hands, I wrote, Sometimes retirement doesn't mean the danger retires with you. Sometimes it follows you into the quiet places. I closed the book, feeling the ache in my knee and the heavier ache in my chest. I hadn't saved the world, but I had done something. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The world doesn't stop needing good people just because we grow old or tired. Sometimes the duty to do what's right follows us into the quiet corners of our lives. We may not have the strength we once did, but courage doesn't retire and silence never protects the innocent. I was 19 when I got my first real job. Not a summer gig mowing lawns or stocking shelves at the grocery store, but something steady, something that helped keep the lights on at home. My father had been in poor health for years, bad lungs from decades of factory work, and my mom worked double shifts at a diner just to keep us afloat. College wasn't in the cards, not with my grades, and definitely not with our bank account. So when I saw the "Help Wanted" sign taped to the cracked glass door of the Silverwood Inn, I walked inside without thinking twice. It was a run-down roadside motel on the edge of Albuquerque, the kind of place where truckers crashed for a few hours and families stopped only because they couldn't make it to the next town. The carpet smelled like smoke, the neon sign buzzed like it was clinging to life, and the whole place felt like it belonged to another decade. The manager, a short, wiry man named Carl, interviewed me right there in the lobby. He didn't ask about grades or experience, just if I could stay awake at night and handle numbers. I told him I could. He smiled in a way that made me think he didn't care one way or another, then handed me a packet of forms. "Congratulations, kid. You're our new night auditor, 11 to 7, 4 nights a week. Don't bother going to the 3rd floor. Too many complaints, weird stuff happens up there. Just keep the desk running and stay out of trouble." The job was simple enough. I checked in the occasional guest, balanced the ledgers, brewed coffee for the few early risers, and kept the place from falling apart overnight. Most shifts dragged on in silence, broken only by the hum of the vending machine and the late-night infomercials I half-watched on the black-and-white TV behind the counter. I told myself it was just temporary, a paycheck, a step towards something bigger. But on that Monday night in February, I learned how quickly a single shift can brand itself into your memory forever. That night, the Silverwood Inn felt emptier than usual. By midnight, only 2 rooms were occupied, and the lot outside was mostly bare. I had just finished walking the halls, checking that doors were shut, lights weren't flickering too badly, and the soda machine still hummed in the corner when I noticed him. At first, I thought he was just another traveler, maybe a guy stretching his legs after a long drive. He stood under the flickering streetlight at the edge of the lot, tall, still, his face hidden beneath a black ski mask. It wasn't cold that night. Chilly maybe, but nothing that called for a mask. I squinted through the lobby glass, waiting for him to move, to smoke, to do something normal. But he just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring straight ahead. Maybe he's waiting for someone, I muttered under my breath. I forced myself back to the desk, tried focusing on the books. Every few minutes, though, I found my eyes drifting back toward the glass doors. He hadn't moved. He was still there, just watching. By 1 in the morning, my nerves were shot. I picked up the motel phone to call Carl, just to let him know something strange was going on. But when I pressed the receiver to my ear, all I got was static. No dial tone, no operator, nothing. I set the phone down carefully, like even the sound of the receiver clicking back into place might give me away. "Okay, this is getting weird," I whispered. Then he moved. The man walked across the lot with steady steps, never looking away from the lobby. The flickering streetlight threw his shadow long across the cracked asphalt, and for a moment I felt like a rabbit trapped in a field with nowhere to run. He stopped just inches from the glass doors. I could see the outline of his chest rising and falling beneath his black jacket, the faint reflection of the fluorescent lights bouncing off the eye holes in his mask. My heart hammered so loud I thought he could hear it. I reached for the lock, twisting it shut with a loud clunk. His gloved hand pressed against the handle and rattled it. Please, 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 I whispered under my breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a revolver. He raised it until the barrel pointed straight at me. No glass, no space, no mercy between us. I froze. My knees buckled. I shut my eyes, bracing for the shatter of glass, the crack of the shot, the burning pain I was certain would follow. Click. I heard the hammer pull back. My breath caught, but nothing came. When I dared to open my eyes, the man was gone. No footsteps, no sound of retreating boots, just the empty parking lot under the flickering light. For nearly 20 minutes, I sat crouched behind the desk, unable to move. Finally, I crawled to the phone and dialed 911 with trembling hands. When the police arrived, they searched every inch of the lot. No footprints, no tire marks, nothing. "Kid, are you sure you didn't imagine it?" one officer asked, eyeing me with a mix of pity and suspicion. "I didn't imagine it," I said, my voice shaking. "I swear to God I didn't." But looking at my trembling hands, I wasn't sure I believed myself either. I never thought I'd end up backtracking to my mother's house at 26, with my kid sister in tow and my whole life packed into the trunk of a beat-up sedan. Yet that was exactly where I found myself in October of 2011, driving east on I-40 with swollen eyes, a gnawing headache, and nothing but failure trailing behind me. A week earlier, I had been engaged, planning a wedding, convinced I was building a future. Then everything unraveled in a blur of shouting, betrayal, and the kind of heartbreak that leaves you sick in your stomach. My fiancé had been cheating, and worse, he hadn't even cared when I found out. The engagement ring I had once admired under the California sun now sat at the bottom of my purse, heavy as a stone. Clara was the only one who didn't say, "I told you so." She was 19, restless, and a little reckless, but she had stood beside me when I felt like I was falling apart. She didn't even hesitate when I told her I was leaving Los Angeles. She threw her bag into the car and said, "Then I'm coming with you." We had been driving for hours, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. My hands clutched the wheel as if the road itself might disappear. Clara kept her earbuds in, scrolling her phone, barely speaking until the city lights of Flagstaff appeared like a small miracle. By then, it was close to midnight, and exhaustion weighed on me like lead. When the neon sign of the Blue Horizon Motel buzzed into view, half the letters dark, it felt like the best option we had. I pulled in with a sigh. The lot was nearly empty, the cracked asphalt scattered with broken bottles and cigarette butts. Something about the place made my skin crawl, but I told myself it was just fatigue. Clara gave me a doubtful look but didn't argue when I said, "It's just one night. We'll be gone by morning." Inside, the manager barely spoke. He pushed the key toward me with trembling hands, his eyes avoiding mine. His wrist was wrapped in a fresh bandage, and I remember wondering if he'd hurt himself at work. The whole exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it set a tone I couldn't shake. Room 12 smelled of bleach and dampness, the kind of odor that clings to your clothes. The sheets didn't match, one lamp buzzed on and off, and the carpet was sticky in places. Clara groaned, "This place gives me the creeps," and flopped onto the bed. I tried to laugh it off. "Better than the car," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. We showered, changed, and killed the lights. For a few minutes, the silence of the desert wrapped around us, and I almost convinced myself we'd get some rest. But somewhere deep down, I already knew this night wouldn't be ordinary. Something was waiting for us in that room, and I could feel it even before I closed my eyes. I woke to Clara whispering my name. "Evie. Do you hear that?" At first I thought it was just the plumbing, the old pipes groaning like they do in cheap motels. But then I sat up and listened. What I heard wasn't pipes, it was voices. They drifted through the vent above the bed, faint but sharp enough to catch. A woman's voice, cracking with fear, another, deeper, angry. And then, something else. Softer, like a child repeating words I couldn't make out. Clara clutched her blanket, wide-eyed. "Call the front desk." "Someone's fighting," she whispered. "Maybe we should—" I shook my head. My gut told me it wasn't a simple argument. The woman's tone wasn't just angry, it was desperate, begging. The man's responses were muffled, growling. And the child, that whisper sent chills down my spine. I forced myself out of bed, pretending to be brave. "Thin walls," I told her, though my voice lacked conviction. I pressed my ear closer to the vent, and that's when the voices stopped. Mid-sentence. Silence, thick and unnatural, swallowed the room. Clara stared at me, trembling. "Evie, let's just go. Please." "We can't," I said, though I wanted to, anywhere else. "It's the middle of the night. We don't have the money for." I backed away from the vent, and that's when I saw it. Scratched into the wooden nightstand, faint but clear under the flickering lamp. "Do not listen to them. They know you are here." My breath caught in my throat. Someone else had been in this room before us, someone who heard what we were hearing. Clara whispered, "What if it's that creep from the gas station? What if he followed us?" I wanted to reassure her, but I couldn't. Instead, I turned on every light in the room, pulled the chair against the door, and sat awake, listening. The voices didn't return, but the silence felt heavier than before, like the motel itself was holding its breath. We didn't sleep. We sat there until the first gray light of morning slipped through the thin curtains, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Nothing except the weight of fear settling deeper into us both. By sunrise, I wanted nothing more than to get out. Clara was pale, her hands shaking as she stuffed clothes into her backpack. Neither of us spoke until we stepped into the lobby. That's when I saw it. The missing persons poster taped near the front desk. A woman and a little boy, smiling in the photograph. Date missing, October 9th, 2010, 1 year earlier. Same day, same motel. I froze. Clara followed my gaze, her lips parting as she read the words. Before either of us could speak, the manager looked up. His watery eyes met mine for the first time, and he gave me the faintest, knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong in a place like this. A smile that said he knew exactly what we'd heard. I grabbed Clara's hand, muttered a thank you, and pushed her toward the car. We didn't breathe until we were back on the highway, the blue horizon fading behind us. The farther we drove, the harder it became to convince myself it had been imagination. The voices were too vivid, too layered. And that warning carved into the nightstand. It wasn't just random graffiti. It was a message, left for whoever came after. Clara was quiet most of the day, staring out the window. Finally, she said, "Woman and her son? That's who we heard?" "Do you think?" That I didn't want to believe it, but the possibility clung to me. The desperation in the woman's cries, the softness of the child's whispers, it lined up too perfectly. That night, as we checked into a cleaner, brighter motel, I made Clara sleep with the TV on. The hum of voices and laughter from the sitcom reruns was a comfort. Silence felt dangerous now. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece it together. Had the manager been involved? Had he seen something? Or was he just another witness who chose to look away? His smile haunted me almost as much as the voices did. We made it to our mother's house the next evening. She hugged us both, though her eyes lingered on me with a mix of relief and disappointment. I didn't tell her what happened at the Blue Horizon. I didn't think she'd believe me. But I've never forgotten that night. I never forgot the scratch in the nightstand, the sudden silence, the faces on that missing persons poster. Every October, when the air turns cold and the days shorten, I think of that motel. I think of the voices trapped in its walls, calling out for someone to hear them. And I wonder how many other travelers checked into room 12, heard the same thing, and left in silence. Some places carry the weight of what happened within their walls. You can dismiss them as creaks, pipes, or bad dreams, but deep down, you know the truth. Fear is not always a warning to run. It can be a reminder to listen. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore the signs because not everyone gets the chance to leave. I was 27 years old in the winter of 2011, still convinced the world owed me adventure. I'd been running a travel blog for about a year, calling it Restless Roads, and I thought I was onto something unique. Most travel blogs showed beaches, trendy cafes, and bucket list destinations. Mine was different. I wanted to write about the weird, the uncomfortable, the bad experiences that most people would avoid. My audience wasn't huge, but it was growing, and I thrived on the comments that said, "Man, you're crazy for doing this, but I love reading it." That kind of attention can make you reckless. I lived in Portland then, in a studio apartment that smelled faintly of curry from the neighbors cooking and mold from the bathroom I could never quite keep dry. My day job was editing copy for a small marketing firm, boring work that paid the bills. But at night, I would scroll through maps and forums, planning trips I couldn't really afford. When my tax refund came in, I decided to blow it on a new series for the blog. I wanted to call it One-Star Stays. The idea was simple. Pick some of the lowest-rated motels in America, stay a night in each, and write about it with humor and photos. Friends told me it was stupid. My best friend Ryan said, "Ethan, you're gonna get robbed, or worse. People write those reviews for a reason." But I brushed it off. "That's the point," I told him. "I'll suffer so readers don't have to." At 27, I thought being reckless was the same thing as being brave. That's how I ended up booking a night at the Desert Inn Lodge in Gallup, New Mexico. The place had a 1.3-star average on the review site. People wrote horror stories about cockroaches, drug dealers in the parking lot, and police visits. It sounded perfect for my series. Cheap too, $32 for a single. I booked it with a grin, already imagining the funny captions I'd write. I pulled in around 10:15 on a Tuesday night. The neon sign outside barely worked, only half the letters glowing, so it read, "Day in Low," the lot was littered with broken bottles and trash, and 2 cars sat on flat tires like they'd been abandoned for years. The office was dim, smelling of stale smoke and burnt coffee. The desk clerk barely looked up when I came in. His hair was greasy, hanging over his forehead, and he had the kind of pale skin that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in months. A TV behind him played static. When I asked if the place had Wi-Fi, he smirked. "You're lucky if the lights stay on." He slid a rusted key across the counter without another word. I carried my bag to room 19, and the second I opened the door, I realized this might not be funny at all. The carpet was stained, the sheets yellowed, and the air smelled like mold. The bathroom door didn't close, and the lamp on the nightstand was burned out. Worse, the window lock was broken, the thin curtain flapping with the desert wind. On the floor near the nightstand was a used syringe. I took a picture for the blog, but my hand wasn't steady. I set my bag down, turned on my camera, and told myself it was just part of the experience. But the truth was already gnawing at me. This didn't feel like a joke anymore. I tried to keep the spirit of the project alive by taking notes, snapping pictures of the broken furniture, and even recording a short video of myself joking about the stains. But the more I looked around, the harder it was to force a smile. The room didn't feel just dirty. It felt unsafe. Around 11, I heard raised voices outside. I pulled the curtain back an inch and saw 2 men by a beat-up pickup truck. They were arguing, one shoving a wad of cash into the other's hand. Then I saw a small package change hands. My stomach tightened. One of the men glanced up and caught me watching. Our eyes met through the gap in the curtain. I ducked back, heart hammering, whispering, "It's just part of the experience." I sat at the desk, typing nervously into my laptop, but my ears stayed sharp to every sound. At 11:40, a woman screamed somewhere down the hallway, "Leave me alone." Then silence. I froze with my hands over the keys, listening, waiting. The silence stretched until I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. A few minutes later, something slammed into my door. Hard. The dresser rattled. My whole body jolted. Heavy footsteps moved down the hallway and a low voice muttered, "Wrong room." I sat there shaking, barely able to breathe. The humor I thought I'd find in this place was gone. All that was left was fear. I thought about packing my stuff and leaving, but outside, engines kept revving. Cars pulled in and out, headlights slicing through the thin curtain, music blasting from stereos. It felt like the motel was alive with movement, most of it dangerous. Every time a car door slammed, I flinched. At 12:10, I heard it, a sharp crack, unmistakable. Gunfire. My instincts told me to hit the floor, and I did, pressing my cheek against the dirty carpet. Shouts rang out, people running, another crack splitting the night. Through the bottom edge of the curtain, I saw a man collapse by the vending machine. My camera sat on the bed, but I couldn't bring myself to grab it. For the first time in my life, I understood that this wasn't content. This was survival. I lay there, frozen, until the sound of sirens cut through the chaos. Red and blue lights filled the lot, flashing across the thin walls. Police shouted commands, guns drawn. I crawled to the window and peeked out. Officers were dragging men from rooms, cuffing them, pressing them against cars. The clerk was shoved out of the office in handcuffs. Paramedics knelt over the body by the vending machine, but he wasn't moving. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. When the chaos finally died down, the lot looked like a war zone. Police tape fluttered in the cold wind. Officers stood in small clusters talking into radios, and the body by the vending machine was covered with a sheet. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. They wouldn't stop shaking. A knock at my door made me jump. I opened it slowly to find a uniformed officer standing there, flashlight in hand. "Evening, sir. We're checking the rooms. You a guest here tonight?" "Yeah," I croaked, my voice rough. "Room 19. He nodded and asked for my ID. I handed it over with trembling fingers. "Anything tonight?" he asked. "You hear or see?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my head down and get the hell out. But another part, the part that started this blog, the part that thought chasing stories made me brave, spoke up. "I saw a deal going down in the parking lot around 11. 2 guys, one driving a pickup, and I heard a woman scream down the hall." The officer scribbled notes, asked a few more questions, and gave me back my license. "May need a statement later. Don't leave town without checking in, all right?" The words sank into me. Don't leave town. This was supposed to be one night, one stupid blog post. Now it felt like I'd stepped into something I couldn't walk away from. When the officer left, I sat at the desk, staring at my laptop screen. The blog page I'd been drafting was still open. A half-written caption read, "You think your motel is bad? At least you didn't find a syringe by the bed." I closed the lid. The whole thing felt grotesque now. At 3 in the morning, I finally left the room, stepping carefully over the glass shards near the stairwell. The lot smelled like exhaust and smoke, and the flashing lights had faded to just a few parked cruisers. I climbed into my car and drove to a Walmart parking lot a couple miles away. The relief of locking my own doors and knowing no one was a wall away from me was overwhelming. I reclined the seat and closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Every slam of a cart or distant car door jolted me awake again. By sunrise, I knew I couldn't just pretend this was another travel story. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't just a blogger chasing laughs. I was a guy who'd almost gotten pulled into something violent, maybe fatal, because I treated danger like it was entertainment. I sipped stale coffee from a gas station cup, staring at my reflection in the convenience store window. My eyes were bloodshot, face pale. I looked less like an adventurer and more like someone who just barely dodged becoming a headline. For the first time, I started asking myself hard questions. What was I really chasing? Views? Attention? A sense of being different? Was it worth the knot of fear still twisting in my chest? I didn't have answers, not yet. But I knew I couldn't keep going the way I had been. That afternoon, I drove back to the motel, not because I wanted to, but because the police asked me to stop by and give a formal statement. I parked on the edge of the lot, watching as workers strung more yellow tape across the stairwell. The neon sign buzzed faintly overhead, still flickering day and low. Inside the office, the same clerk who'd smirked at me the night before was gone. A different officer sat at the desk taking notes. He waved me over and introduced himself as Detective Harris. "We just want to get your version of things on record. Take your time." So I told him about the men in the parking lot, the cash, the package, the scream in the hallway, and the thud against my door. I left out the part where I was there for a blog, at least at first. But Harris was sharp. "What brought you to this place anyway? Business? Passing through?" I swallowed hard. In America. I run a small travel blog. I was doing a piece on, well, the worst motels." His eyebrow lifted just slightly. "Son, that's one hell of a way to gamble with your life." I couldn't argue. After an hour, they thanked me and told me I was free to go, but the word stuck: gamble with your life. Driving away, I realized that was exactly what I'd been doing. Not just that night, but maybe the whole time I'd been chasing cheap thrills and calling it adventure. I checked into a chain motel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy but clean, with working locks and fluorescent lighting in the parking lot. The first thing I did after locking the door was call Ryan. "Dude, are you okay?" he asked after I told him what happened. "A shooting in Gallup last night." "That was the place?" "I saw something online about..." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It was the place." There was a pause. Then he said, "Wants to read your obituary." "Ethan, you need to stop this crap. It's not worth it." "Nobody..." His words hit me harder than I expected. I stared at the clean motel sheets, at the coffee maker humming in the corner, and realized how much I'd taken normal safety for granted. That night I wrote. Not jokes, not snarky captions, just the truth. I wrote about the fear, about lying on the dirty carpet with gunshots outside my door, about realizing I wasn't invincible. The words poured out of me, raw and unpolished, but real. When I finally clicked publish, I didn't feel clever. I didn't feel adventurous. I just felt honest. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. The blog post went live around midnight. I didn't expect much. Honestly, I thought maybe a handful of regular readers would skim it, then move on to funnier content somewhere else. But by morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages filled my inbox. Some were from strangers. "Man, I've stayed at that place. I left after 10 minutes." Others were sobering. "My brother didn't make it out of a motel like that alive. Thank you for telling the truth." The post was being shared far more than anything else I'd ever written. Not because it was witty or edgy, but because it was raw. People connected with the fear, with the honesty of realizing too late that a stunt could have ended in tragedy. I sat at the edge of the motel bed, still processing the night before when my phone rang. It was my mom. She never called this early. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "News this morning," I thought. She couldn't finish. "Please stop doing these crazy things." When I saw the hearing, the crack in her voice broke something in me. All those times I brushed off her worry, all the times I told friends it was no big deal. Now I heard her fear, plain as day, and it cut deeper than any criticism online ever could. "I'm done, Mom," I said, and for the first time I meant it. The next couple of days passed in a blur. I gave a follow-up statement to the police, then packed my car and headed west toward Arizona, skipping the list of motels I'd planned to hit. Instead of chasing ratings, I stopped at quiet roadside diners, talked to truckers, wrote about landscapes and history. It felt different, slower, maybe less exciting, but I felt safe. And that mattered more than the clicks. One evening, parked at a rest stop near Flagstaff, I pulled out my camera, not to catch something shocking or gross, but just to photograph the sunset painting the desert in orange and violet. For once, I wasn't performing for strangers online. I was just living. I thought about that night in Gallup often, about the woman's scream, the thud at my door, the body by the vending machine. It replayed in my head, but instead of fueling my blog, it fueled a change in me. I realized I'd been treating danger like a theme park ride, something you could step into for fun, then walk away from. But danger doesn't work that way. It's real, and it doesn't care if you're looking for a story. That lesson stayed with me. Even now, years later, I can't drive past a rundown motel without a chill crawling up my spine. I know some stories aren't meant to be laughed at or packaged as entertainment. Some stories are warnings, and I was lucky enough to live through mine to tell it. Chasing danger for attention might seem thrilling, but life isn't a stage play where you can always walk away. Real risks carry real consequences, not just for you, but for the people who care about you. The lesson I learned in that dim Gallup motel was simple. Your life is worth more than likes, clicks, or stories. Some places and some choices aren't worth the gamble.